When my wife looked me straight in the eyes and said, "If you leave this house today, I'll make sure you lose everything," I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even ask what she meant. I simply picked up my keys, walked to the front door, and left without saying a single word. At that moment, she smiled because she thought she had already won. She had no idea that my silence would become the one thing she could never fight. My name is Daniel. I'm 36 years old, and until a few months ago, I honestly believed I had a normal marriage. It wasn't perfect, but whose marriage is? We had been together for almost 11 years. We owned a comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood. We had stable jobs. Friends always called us the couple who never seemed to have serious problems. Looking back now, I realize people only saw what my wife wanted them to see. Behind our front door, things had been falling apart for a long time. Claire had changed so slowly that I barely noticed it. At first it was little things. She stopped asking about my day. She always seemed distracted whenever we had dinner together. Her phone was never out of her hand. If I walked into the room, she would flip it over without thinking. Whenever I asked who she was talking to, she laughed and called me insecure. I believed her because I trusted her more than I trusted my own instincts. Then came the constant criticism. Nothing I did was ever enough anymore. If I worked late, I didn't care about our marriage. If I came home early, I wasn't ambitious enough. If I cooked dinner, she complained it wasn't healthy. If I ordered food, she said I was wasting money. Every conversation somehow became my fault. I kept telling myself she was just stressed. I thought if I stayed patient, things would eventually get better. One Friday evening, I surprised her with reservations at the same restaurant where I had proposed years earlier. I thought maybe we just needed one good night together. She stared at the reservation confirmation on my phone and sighed. Then she told me she had forgotten she already had plans with friends. She didn't apologize. She simply grabbed her purse and left while I stood in the kitchen holding flowers that suddenly felt ridiculous. That dinner reservation stayed in my pocket all night. I sat alone at that restaurant pretending I wasn't waiting for someone who was never coming. Around halfway through my meal, I looked across the room and froze. Claire walked in laughing, but she wasn't with her friends. She was with a man I'd never seen before. They weren't holding hands. They weren't kissing. Anyone else would probably say it looked innocent, but married people notice the little things. The way she leaned toward him. The way she smiled without forcing it. The way he reached across the table and she didn't move away. That wasn't how strangers behaved. I could have walked over. I could have demanded answers right there in front of everyone. Instead, I quietly paid my bill and left through the back entrance. For the first time in our marriage, I chose observation over confrontation. The next morning, Claire acted like nothing had happened. She casually mentioned how much fun she and her girlfriends had the night before. She even made up funny little stories about the evening. I watched her tell those lies without missing a beat. Something inside me finally cracked. Not because I had caught her with another man, but because she could look directly into my eyes and lie so naturally. From that day forward, I stopped asking questions. I started paying attention instead. I noticed she left the house every Tuesday evening at exactly the same time. I noticed she had changed every password. I noticed credit card charges I couldn't explain. Most of all, I noticed she seemed happier whenever I wasn't around. One afternoon, while cleaning the garage, I found an old box filled with family papers. Mixed between tax documents was a bank statement I had never seen before. It belonged to an account with only Claire's name on it. The balance wasn't a few $100s. It was almost $80,000. My hands started shaking. We had spent 2 years talking about money. She kept telling me we couldn't afford vacations. She insisted we delay fixing the roof because our savings were too low. We even postponed trying to have children because she said we weren't financially ready. But somehow she had secretly built a small fortune without ever telling me. I didn't know where the money came from. I didn't know who knew about it. But for the first time, I stopped wondering whether my wife was hiding something. Now I needed to discover how much she had been hiding. And I had no idea that the answer would destroy far more than our marriage. That bank statement stayed on my mind for the rest of the weekend. I folded it back exactly the way I had found it and returned it to the box. If Claire realized I had seen it, she would only become more careful. For now, I needed answers, not another argument. I had spent years believing every explanation she gave me. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. Over the next few days, I watched everything without changing my routine. I still went to work. I still made dinner whenever it was my turn. I still smiled when our neighbors waved. To everyone else, nothing had changed. Inside my head, it felt like every piece of my marriage was slowly being taken apart. Claire became even more secretive. She started taking phone calls outside on the back porch. If I walked near the sliding door, she would lower her voice or end the call. Some nights she stayed awake long after I had gone to bed. I would wake up at 2 in the morning and see the light from her phone glowing under the blanket. Then, something strange happened. One afternoon I came home early because a meeting had been canceled. Claire wasn't expecting me. As I opened the front door, I heard her laughing upstairs. It wasn't the polite laugh she used around friends. It was warm and genuine. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard in months. I quietly walked toward the stairs. The moment the floor creaked, everything went silent. A few seconds later, she came downstairs with her phone in her hand and looked surprised to see me. "I thought you were working late." "My meeting ended early." She forced a smile. "Oh, I was just talking to my cousin." It sounded rehearsed, like she had already prepared that answer before I even asked. I nodded and walked past her. For the first time, she looked nervous. That night, after she fell asleep, I did something I had never done before. I picked up her phone. The screen was locked with a new password. I put it back exactly where it was. I hated myself for even trying, but I hated the lies even more. The following Tuesday, she left the house at 6:30 like always. Instead of staying home, I waited 5 minutes and got into my car. I kept enough distance so she wouldn't notice me. She didn't drive to a restaurant. She didn't drive to a friend's house. She pulled into the parking lot of a small office building on the other side of town. There were no business signs outside, except for one law office and a financial consulting company. I stayed across the street watching. 10 minutes later, a black SUV parked beside her. A man in a gray suit stepped out. He wasn't the same man from the restaurant. Claire smiled as soon as she saw him. They shook hands. Then they walked into the building together. They stayed inside for almost an hour. When they finally came back outside, they weren't touching each other. They looked completely professional. Before leaving, the man handed Claire a thick envelope. She placed it inside her bag, without even looking inside. I couldn't stop thinking about that envelope all the way home. What was inside? Documents? Cash? Legal papers? Nothing made sense anymore. That evening, Claire acted perfectly normal. She even asked me how my day had been, which almost made me laugh. It had been months since she cared enough to ask. I answered with one word. Fine. She looked relieved. She still believed I knew nothing. The next morning I made a decision. Instead of guessing, I was going to find proof. During lunch, I called an old college friend named Marcus. He had become a private investigator after leaving the police department. We hadn't spoken in years, but he still recognized my voice. After hearing only 2 minutes of my story, he became quiet. Finally, he said something that sent a chill through my body. "Daniel, people usually don't hide one secret. They hide a whole life." 2 days later, Marcus called me back. "I've got something." We met at a small coffee shop after work. He slid a folder across the table. "I haven't finished yet, but I think you should see this." Inside were photographs. Claire entering the same office building. Claire meeting the man in the gray suit. Claire meeting another woman I had never seen before. Then, I reached the last photo. My heart stopped. It showed Claire standing outside a luxury apartment building. Standing beside her was the same man from the restaurant. This time they weren't sitting across a table. They were hugging. And just before they disappeared inside the building, he kissed her. I stared at the picture for what felt like forever. Marcus slowly took a sip of his coffee before looking back at me. "I don't think this affair started recently," he said quietly. "I think it's been going on for a very long time." And deep down, I was beginning to fear that cheating wasn't even the biggest secret my wife was hiding. I didn't sleep that night. The photos stayed on the kitchen table while I sat there until sunrise, staring at them over and over again. Every time I looked at Claire's face, I searched for some sign that I had misunderstood everything. Maybe the hug meant nothing. Maybe the kiss had an explanation. But every excuse I made only sounded more ridiculous than the last. When Claire came downstairs the next morning, she smiled as if it were any other day. "You're up early." I couldn't sleep. She poured herself a cup of coffee and casually checked her phone. Not once did she notice the folder hidden under a newspaper on the table. "I'll be home late tonight," she said. "We have another meeting at work." Another lie. I simply nodded. "Drive safe." She kissed my cheek before leaving. The moment the front door closed, I wiped my face. That kiss felt colder than anything I had ever experienced. Later that afternoon, Marcus called again. I found something else. His voice sounded different this time. More serious. We met in his office instead of the coffee shop. He placed another file in front of me. The apartment where I photographed Claire. He paused. "It's been rented for almost 18 months. 18 months? He nodded. "The lease isn't under Claire's name." "Then, whose is it?" He slid one document across the desk. "The man you've been seeing. His name was Ethan Brooks. 39 years old. Successful real estate investor. Divorced. No children. I kept reading until one detail caught my attention. Emergency contact. Claire Morgan. My wife. Not his sister. Not a coworker. Not a friend. My wife. I looked up at Marcus. Are you sure? I checked it twice. A heavy silence filled the room. Then Marcus reached into his desk and handed me one final envelope. I wasn't sure if I should show you this today. Inside were copies of public financial records. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I noticed Claire's signature. She had co-signed several investment contracts. Not with me. With Ethan. The total value was over $600,000. I could barely breathe. Claire had spent years telling me we couldn't afford simple home repairs. Yet somehow, she had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars with another man. There was only one problem. Claire didn't have that kind of money. Neither did I. So where had it come from? Marcus answered the question before I could ask. I've been looking into your joint finances. My stomach tightened. There have been regular transfers from your shared savings account. That's impossible. I thought so too. He pushed the bank statements toward me. Every few weeks, small amounts disappeared. $500, $800, $1,200. Never enough for me to notice. Over nearly 4 years, those small transfers had become almost $170,000. She hadn't stolen it all at once. She had taken it slowly, patiently, carefully. I remembered every conversation where she told me we had to save money. Every vacation we canceled. Every birthday gift we skipped. Every weekend job I accepted to help build our future. While I was sacrificing, she was quietly building another life. I drove home feeling completely numb. Claire arrived an hour later carrying takeout food like she wanted to surprise me. I thought we could have dinner together. I looked at her. For just a second, I wondered what would happen if I placed every photograph on the table. Would she admit everything? Would she cry? Would she apologize? Instead, she smiled. You look tired. I'm fine. You've seemed distant lately. The irony almost made me laugh. She was asking why I seemed distant while secretly living a second life. As we ate dinner, she talked about office gossip, weekend plans, and a movie she wanted us to watch. I barely heard a word. Then she suddenly reached across the table. Daniel. Yeah? I love you. The words hit harder than any insult ever could. Because, for the first time, I knew she didn't mean them. That night, after she fell asleep, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up for just a second. She had forgotten to turn it face down. I wasn't trying to snoop. I simply looked. One message. From Ethan. Everything is almost ready. He still has no idea. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just an affair anymore. They were planning something. And somehow, I was at the center of it. I read the message 3 more times before the screen went dark. Everything is almost ready. He still has no idea. For a moment, I considered waking Claire up and demanding an explanation. My hand was already reaching toward her shoulder. Then I stopped. If they were planning something, confronting her now would only warn them. Whatever game they were playing, I needed to know the ending before I made my move. The next morning, I forwarded the photo of the message to Marcus. He called me less than 10 minutes later. Don't confront her. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because if they're preparing legal documents or moving money, one mistake could cost you everything. His words stayed with me all day. Cost you everything. That was exactly what Claire had been doing for years. Marcus started digging deeper into Ethan's business records, while I focused on keeping my routine normal. I laughed when Claire expected me to laugh. I answered questions with short replies. I even agreed to go out for dinner on Saturday. She had no reason to think I suspected anything. Saturday evening felt strange. Claire looked happier than she had in months. She dressed up, complimented my shirt, even held my hand while we walked into the restaurant. Anyone watching us would have believed we were deeply in love. Halfway through dinner, she suddenly smiled. I've been thinking. About what? I think we should finally sell the house. The fork froze in my hand. Our house? She nodded. It's too big for just the two of us. We could buy something smaller and start fresh. Start fresh. Those words sounded innocent. But after everything I had discovered, they felt dangerous. I asked the question as casually as I could. And what would we do with the money? She answered without hesitation. We'll split it into investments. Investments. The same word that appeared on every document Marcus had shown me. I smiled. That's not a bad idea. She looked relieved. For the first time in weeks, she believed I was completely on her side. The following Monday, Marcus called with news that changed everything. I found Ethan's lawyer. So? The law office you've been watching isn't handling business deals. What are they handling? Marcus took a slow breath. Divorce settlements. I felt my heart stop. Divorce? Not yours. What do you mean? Ethan's divorce was finalized almost 2 years ago by the same lawyer Claire has been meeting. None of it made sense. Why would my wife meet his divorce lawyer? I asked myself the same question. There was a long silence. Then Marcus said something that made my stomach twist. I think she's preparing paperwork. What paperwork? I don't know yet. That evening, Claire came home carrying a bottle of expensive wine. We should celebrate. Celebrate what? She smiled. Nothing special. I just miss us. Miss us. The woman secretly meeting another man wanted to celebrate our marriage. I almost admired how convincing she could be. While she cooked dinner, her phone rang in the living room. She rushed out of the kitchen before I could even look at the screen. I'll take this outside. She was gone for nearly 20 minutes. When she came back, she looked frustrated. Everything okay? I asked. She forced a smile. Just work. Another lie. Later that night, Marcus sent me an email. It contained only one attachment. A scanned document. I opened it. At the top of the page were the words, Property Transfer Agreement. My hand started shaking. The document wasn't complete, but it clearly listed our house. My house. Our savings. Several investment accounts. Almost every major asset we owned. There was only one thing missing. My signature. Claire wasn't just planning to leave. She was trying to convince me to sign away nearly everything before I even realized what was happening. I sat there in complete silence. Then I remembered something she had said weeks earlier. We should simplify our finances. At the time, I thought she was trying to help us. Now I realized she had been preparing me to willingly hand over my own future. As I stared at the document, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. A calm male voice spoke. Mr. Morgan? Yes. My name is Robert. I'm calling from Harrison Legal Group. My heart began pounding. We're confirming your appointment with your wife this Thursday at 2 p.m. What appointment? There was a brief pause. You and Mrs. Morgan are scheduled to sign several financial documents. I spent the next 2 days thinking about that phone call. Claire had arranged a legal appointment in my name without telling me. She expected me to walk into an office, smile, sign a stack of papers, and unknowingly hand over the life we had built together. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how confident she was that I would never question her. For years, she had trained me to trust every word she said. Every financial decision. Every excuse. Every promise. She believed I was still that man. She was wrong. Thursday arrived faster than I expected. That morning, Claire was unusually cheerful. She made breakfast. She even joked about taking a weekend trip after all the paperwork was finished. I smiled just enough to keep her comfortable. Around 1 o'clock, she walked into the living room holding a leather folder. Ready? Sure. The drive to the law office was painfully quiet. Claire kept talking about future plans. A smaller house. Less stress. More freedom. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. When we arrived, the receptionist greeted us with a smile and led us into a conference room. A lawyer entered a minute later. He introduced himself and placed several documents on the table. I noticed something immediately. He kept looking at Claire instead of me, almost as if she had already explained everything before I got there. He started speaking. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, these documents will simplify ownership of several shared assets. Simplify. There was that word again. The lawyer slid the first page toward me. Please sign here. I didn't touch the pen. Instead, I slowly picked up the document and began reading every single line. The room became very quiet. Claire shifted in her chair. You don't have to read all of it, she said, with a nervous laugh. It's just standard paperwork. I looked at her. For 11 years, you've always told me to read everything before signing. Her smile faded for a second. The lawyer cleared his throat. Of course, take your time. 10 minutes later, I reached the section Marcus had warned me about. If I signed those papers, Claire would become the primary owner of our house. Several investment accounts would also be transferred into a trust controlled only by her. If our marriage ended afterward, I would have almost nothing. I looked up. Can you explain why my ownership percentage changes here? The lawyer froze. Claire answered before he could. It's just legal wording. No, I said calmly. I'd like him to explain. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Morgan informed us that both parties had already agreed to these terms. I turned toward Claire. I never agreed to this. For the first time since we walked into the building. She looked scared. She quickly reached for my hand. Daniel, you're overthinking this. I gently pulled my hand away. No. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. If either party has concerns, we should postpone today's meeting. Claire immediately interrupted. No, we don't need to postpone anything. Then she looked directly at me. Just sign the papers. It wasn't a request. It sounded like an order. I slowly closed the folder. I'm not signing anything today. The room fell silent. Claire's face changed instantly. The sweet smile disappeared. The patient wife vanished. A completely different person was sitting across from me. The lawyer quietly excused himself and left the room, giving us privacy. The door clicked shut. Claire leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You have no idea what you're doing. I think I finally do. Her eyes became cold. So that's it? I nodded. That's it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said the words, I will never forget. If you walk away from this, she pointed toward the documents. I'll make sure you lose everything. There was no anger in her voice. Only confidence. She believed she still had enough power to destroy me. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I stood up. I gathered nothing. Not the documents. Not the folder. Not even my jacket. I simply walked to the door. Behind me, she raised her voice. Daniel. I stopped for 1 second, but I never turned around. You'll regret this. I opened the door. Still silent. Still calm. Then I walked out of the office. That should have been the end. But when I reached the parking lot, Marcus was standing beside my car. His expression told me something had happened. Something big. He walked over and handed me another envelope. I just received this 20 minutes ago. What is it? You need to sit down before you open it. I looked inside. The first page contained a DNA test request. The second page contained hospital records from nearly 12 years earlier. And written across the top of the final document were 6 words that completely changed my life. Paternity status. Further testing recommended. For several seconds, I couldn't even breathe. The words on that last page didn't make sense. Paternity status. Further testing recommended. I looked at Marcus. There has to be a mistake. I hoped there was. He motioned toward a nearby bench, and we sat down in complete silence. I didn't go looking for this, he said. While checking Claire's legal records, I found an old court filing. It led me to a medical archive. I stared at the papers. What exactly am I looking at? Marcus took a slow breath. 12 years ago, Claire became pregnant. I frowned. We weren't even married yet. I know. My heart began racing. We lost that baby. That's what you were told. Those words hit me like a truck. I remembered Claire crying in my apartment. I remembered holding her for hours after she told me she had miscarried. I remembered promising that one day we'd have another chance. That memory had carried us through years of pain. Now, Marcus was telling me it might have been a lie. The hospital records don't show a miscarriage, he continued. They show a healthy pregnancy that was transferred to another doctor. I shook my head. No. I verified it twice. Everything around me suddenly felt unreal. If she hadn't lost the baby, then where had that child gone? Marcus answered the question before I asked it. I don't know. The drive home was the longest of my life. Every memory with Claire suddenly felt fake. Every promise, every tear, every anniversary. I walked into the house just before sunset. Claire was already there. She looked at me from the kitchen. You left your jacket. I know. She studied my face for a few seconds. You're quiet. I gave a small nod. Tired. She walked closer. About earlier. I waited. I shouldn't have raised my voice. There it was. Not an apology for lying. Not an apology for trying to trick me into signing legal documents. She apologized only because she had lost control. I just got emotional, she said. I understand. Those 3 words surprised her. She expected an argument. Instead, I gave her peace. She smiled. I knew you'd calm down. She still believed she could manipulate me. That night she fell asleep quickly. I stayed awake. Around midnight, I quietly walked into my home office. For the next 4 hours, I copied every financial record I could find. Bank statements, mortgage papers, insurance policies, tax returns, everything. At sunrise, I placed the copies inside a locked briefcase. The originals stayed exactly where Claire expected them to be. By Monday morning, I had opened a new bank account in my name. I changed every direct deposit from my paycheck. I rented a small apartment across town using money from a personal emergency fund Claire didn't know existed. For the first time in years, I had a plan. Marcus also had good news. The financial investigator finished reviewing everything. And Claire has been moving money for years. I figured that much out. You don't understand. He slid another report across the table. The transfers didn't stop with Ethan. There were 3 other names. 3 different accounts. 3 different companies. Claire had been spreading the money across multiple places to make it almost impossible to trace. This wasn't emotional, Marcus said quietly. This was organized. I slowly nodded. So she planned this for years. I believe so. A strange feeling settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even shocked. I felt free. Because the woman I loved no longer existed. Maybe she never had. That evening, Claire came home carrying shopping bags. She excitedly showed me new decorations for the living room. We should make the house feel fresh. I smiled. It looks nice. She hugged me tightly. I knew we'd get through this. I hugged her back. For the very last time. Because I already knew. Within 48 hours. I would be gone. And she wouldn't have the slightest idea where to find me. But before I could disappear, there was one final truth waiting for me. A truth so unbelievable. It would explain why Claire had been willing to risk everything to keep me under her control. The next 48 hours passed exactly the way I wanted them to. I acted like nothing had changed. I went to work at the usual time. I came home for dinner. I even watched a movie with Claire on Tuesday night, while she rested her head on my shoulder. She laughed at the funny scenes as if we were still the happy couple everyone believed we were. The entire time, I already knew I was leaving. Wednesday morning, Marcus called before sunrise. I found the last piece. What is it? I need to show you in person. We met at his office an hour later. He placed a thick envelope on the desk. I hired a forensic accountant after seeing all those transfers. I opened the file. Inside were emails, financial records, and property documents. One email immediately caught my attention. It had been sent almost 3 years earlier. From Claire. To Ethan. The subject line read, "After the divorce is final." I wasn't even divorced. I kept reading. Every sentence made my stomach turn. Claire wasn't planning to leave because she had fallen in love with Ethan. She and Ethan had planned the relationship from the beginning. They believed that if they slowly transferred enough money, convinced me to sign away the house, and then filed for divorce, they could walk away with almost everything I owned. But the next email hurt even more. Ethan wrote, "Don't worry, he's too trusting. He'll never see it coming." I stared at those words for several seconds. They weren't just laughing at me. They had built an entire future around my trust. Marcus slid one final document across the desk. "I think you'll want this." It was a property deed. A luxury lake house. Purchased 8 months earlier. The owners? Ethan Brooks. And Claire Morgan. Not my wife. His partner. They had already bought the home where they planned to start their new life together. Using money that had quietly disappeared from our marriage. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I expected to feel rage. Instead, I felt relief. The lies were finally over. There was nothing left to discover. Marcus looked at me. "What are you going to do?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. Exactly what she never expected. That afternoon I met with my attorney. Unlike Claire's lawyer, mine knew the entire story. Every bank statement. Every photograph. Every email. Every hidden transfer. When he finished reading everything, he leaned back in his chair. "Daniel." "Yeah?" "Do not tell her anything." "I won't. Leave the house exactly as it is." He handed me a folder. "We'll file first. And after that?" "After that." He smiled. "She'll be the one trying to explain herself." That evening I packed only one suitcase. Nothing expensive. Nothing that would make Claire suspicious. Just enough clothes for a few weeks. At dinner, she talked about repainting the bedroom. I nodded. She talked about taking a vacation before Christmas. I smiled. She talked about growing old together. I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she was losing me, because she still believed she was winning. Around 9 that night, she went upstairs to take a shower. That was my moment. I picked up my suitcase. I placed my wedding ring on the kitchen table. Beside it, I left only one sheet of paper. There was no long letter, no insults, no accusations, just one sentence. You can keep the lies. I'm keeping my future. I walked out the front door. I locked it behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. My phone started ringing before I even reached my car. Claire. I ignored it. Then another call. Then another. By the time I reached my apartment, there were 17 missed calls. Dozens of text messages. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? We need to talk. Then came the message that made me stop. If you don't come home tonight, I'll make sure you lose everything. The same threat. The same confidence. The same belief that fear still controlled me. I didn't reply. I simply turned off my phone. For the first time in years. The silence belonged to me. But the next morning, someone knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, it wasn't Claire. It was a young woman I'd never seen before. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and quietly asked, "Are you Daniel Morgan?" I nodded. She swallowed hard before saying the words that would change everything one last time. "I think I'm your daughter." But for a few seconds, I couldn't say a word. The young woman standing outside my apartment looked nervous enough to run away at any moment. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," she said quietly. "I know this sounds crazy." I stepped aside. "Come in." She sat on the edge of the couch, holding a small envelope with both hands. "My name is Emma." She couldn't have been older than 20. She looked around the apartment before taking a deep breath. "I've been searching for you for almost a year." I frowned. "I don't understand." She slowly opened the envelope and placed several documents on the coffee table. Birth records, hospital papers, old photographs. One picture showed Claire holding a newborn baby. Another showed Ethan standing beside her. The date hit me immediately. It was 12 years ago. The same year Claire had told me she had lost our baby. Emma looked down at her hands. I grew up believing Ethan was my father. My heart pounded. When I turned 18, I needed some medical records for college. That's when I found out something didn't match. She handed me another paper. It was the result of a DNA test. My biological father wasn't Ethan. I stared at the page. "My mother refused to answer my questions," Emma continued. "She always said the past didn't matter." "So, how did you find me?" She gave a weak smile. "I hired someone. Marcus. Without telling me, he had helped her after she contacted his office." "I thought you deserved the truth," he later admitted. Emma wiped away a tear. "I wasn't looking for money." "I know. I wasn't trying to ruin your life." "I know. I just wanted to know who my real father was." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I quietly asked the question I had been afraid to say out loud. "Did Claire know?" Emma nodded. "She's always known." The room became completely silent. Every lie, every fake tear, every promise. It all came crashing down at once. Claire hadn't lost our child. She had hidden her. She had allowed another man to raise her. And she had spent 12 years pretending that little girl had never existed. A week later, my attorney filed everything. The evidence of hidden accounts. The forged financial plans. The attempted property transfer. The affair. The emails. Every piece fit together. Claire called hundreds of times. She emailed. She left voice messages crying, begging, apologizing. Then came the anger. She blamed Ethan. She blamed stress. She blamed loneliness. Finally, she blamed me. According to her, if I had been a better husband, none of this would have happened. That was the moment I knew I had made the right decision. Because people who truly regret hurting someone take responsibility. They don't search for another victim. Months later, the court ruled in my favor on nearly every major financial issue. The hidden transfers became evidence. The attempted deception destroyed Claire's credibility. She lost far more than she ever expected to gain. Ethan disappeared from her life almost immediately after the investigation began. The man she risked everything for walked away the moment things became difficult. As for me, I didn't celebrate. Winning in court didn't erase the years I had lost. It didn't erase the memories. And it certainly didn't erase the pain of discovering I had missed 12 years with my own daughter. But life has a strange way of giving people another chance. Emma and I started slowly. Coffee once a week. Long conversations. Awkward silences. Stories about birthdays I had missed. Graduations I never attended. Little by little, we stopped feeling like strangers. We couldn't recover the past, but we refused to lose the future. Sometimes people ask me why I never answered Claire's final threat. Why I walked away without screaming. Why I never tried to get revenge. The answer is simple. Silence was the only thing she couldn't control. She expected fear. She expected excuses. She expected me to chase her. Instead, I closed the door, and I never opened it again. But every time I tell this story, people argue about one thing. Should I have forgiven Claire after everything she admitted? Or was walking away forever the only decision that made sense? What would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments.